Now, before I jump into any of the control panels on this, I want to go to the administrator. I said before that we're going to do a lot of bouncing around between different areas of the designer software, and the administrator is one of the ones we're going to be using the most frequently. You can do that by either hitting the little bullhorn icon at the top or by going to Tools, Show Administrator. The administrator, as a reminder, if you don't use it very frequently, is a separate app installation that comes along with Q-SYS whenever you download it. You can access it here within Designer, but you can also give that app just to someone on the site who only needs sort of administrative roles, that is not an engineer and should not ever be touching Q-SYS, but they do still want to do specific things. The paging system is one of the things that is still in Administrator rather exclusively. So here's a window of what your Administrator window looks like. And if you haven't opened this with a PA router in your system before, you wouldn't know that there are 3 tabs that only exist once the PA router is in your design. We have the PA Global Settings tab, the Page Stations tab, and the PA Zones tab. And I would strongly recommend that whenever you start setting up a paging system, go to the PA Zones tab first. This is the first thing you always want to do. This is a list of all of the zones that you've created. I have 5 zones in here. Right now they're named Zone 1 through Zone 5, which are terrible names. These names will propagate in various places in the public address components, so you want to do this now to make your life easier later. So I'm going to rename these. This is my lobby. As you may recall, this was my conference room, my conference room. This is NPR 1, NPR 2, and NPR 3. And what's nice about this page right here is that you can also create something called tags. Tags are a way of grouping things together with a common name. Same way the hashtags work on any social media platform. A hashtag is a way of taking 2, could be completely disparate pieces of content and linking them to each other by them each having the same hashtag. Hashtag Q-SYS rocks. Whoa, 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 bah, bah. Play the air horns. Did they play the air horns, or did I just really embarrass myself? I think they didn't even add that in post. That was pretty embarrassing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the plus button and create a tag. And this tag could be used to group these together. Maybe one of the tags is going to be something like NPR. I could create that NPR tag and then drag it onto all 3 of these NPR rooms. What it's going to let me do is later on, that would let me, rather than select all 3 of those rooms to page them, I could just select the NPR tag, and it will automatically be distributed to any zone that has that tag. You could do it the other way around. Rather than create the tag and then add it to the zones, you could click the zones and then create the tag. Like, what if I select lobby and then the 3 NPR rooms and hit the plus button, and maybe these are all on the ground floor of our hotel. So I'll call this floor 1. Look, they all now have a floor 1 tag. Every zone can have multiple tags, probably as many tags as you can possibly think of to add them. Conference 1 is the only one that's not included. Now, if I want to page all the rooms on floor 1, I can just hit the floor 1 tag and be settled. This is really, really useful, especially, you think about things like an airport where these kinds of paging systems will be installed. If you've got maybe a gate that is owned by one airline during the morning and a different airline in the afternoon, you can make sure that they have the right tag for that airline, and you make sure that everyone in that airline across all the gates gets the same page without having to individually pick every single possible zone that is operating at the moment. This will speed up your time, I promise. And by putting these names in here now, it'll save you from having to keep an Excel sheet open or a piece of paper next to your monitor that writes down what every single possible zone is. So we're doing that work now, and then we're going to hit update. While we're here in the administrator, I want to jump up to PA Global Settings. Global Settings is the first time that we're going to see the priority system I was talking about. Here is where you kind of set up the framework for whatever priority you want to use. Right now, I can see that I've got 5 priority levels down here at the bottom. These 5 priority levels, when you first look at them, I'm going to say this, they're not the best names, because this sort of implies that you could only ever send a page at priority level 1, and you could only ever send a message at priority level 2. That's not accurate. So these are just names that were thrown into the software. You can change them. You should change them to make more sense for you. I think the real benefit of having these names in here right now is that it kind of lets you know which direction our priority schema goes. If these were just absent and you only had 1 through 5, then you might sit there and wonder, wait a second, is 1 important because it's number 1, or is 5 important because it's higher than 1, right? And even the colors do the same thing, red through green. Like, is red important because it's on fire, or is 5 important because green means go? Does red mean stop? Does green mean it's safe? Just our schema means that number 1 is the highest priority, and higher numbers are a lower priority. That's just how it works. So let's rename these. I'm going to say that number 1, that is full-on emergency. That is game over, man. Game over. All right, priority number 2, that is definitely, they're inside the room. That's not possible. Something must be wrong with your motion tracker. Maybe they found something that's not on the blueprints. I don't know. Number 3, yeah, that's a xenomorph sighting for sure. They're not attacking you yet, but they're in the building. Number 4, that's face huggers. Absolutely. And then number 4, everything's good. Affirmative, right there. You can have more than 5, by the way. You can hit this plus button, and you can add as many as you want. I don't think there's actually a cap to the number of times you can add priority levels. Theoretically, I think the math on it might cap it at about 2 million. If you're using 2 million different possible priority levels in your design, please quit everything you've chosen to do in life. You need to make some other choices in general. For each of these, you have some options called retry, archive, and split. So let's talk about those. If I choose to retry an announcement of a certain priority, that means that if it gets booted, if it gets interrupted by a higher priority announcement, do you want it to enter the queuing system or not? If it gets booted, maybe you're fine with that. Think about it. The low-level announcements that you're sending out, these are probably the things like, hey, this is a reminder that the white zone is for loading and for unloading, right? You don't need to retry that. That's on loop. It's going to happen every 10 minutes or whatever about on your parking area. It's fine if that gets interrupted. A higher priority one, yeah, you might want to make sure that gets retried if it gets interrupted. Same thing is true with archiving. For vocal pages, if you are talking into a microphone and you are sending that message, or I'm sorry, that page out into the system, you probably want some proof that you did that. Especially, there's a lot of instances where there may be insurance companies that are involved to make sure that you actually did page certain things at specific times, such as I am trying to sue the airline because they left without me. And I can say, hey, you didn't notify me that I should have been at my gates. And they can say, actually, sir, we did page you 3 times. Here's the proof of the page that we recorded when it went out. And here is data of the times that it was sent to the areas that you should have been in had you been in the airport. But I wasn't because I was late. Anyways, we want to make sure that you have the ability to archive vocal pages. So engage archive on anything that you might want to save. And that'll do 2 things. It'll save those pages automatically in a folder on the core that's called page archives. And it'll also allow you to export those via FTP right here in the archive export. So if you have an FTP server, you want to save those for longevity, do it here. The ones on the core, generally speaking, will only save pages for about a month or so, or when the space does not allow it to take any more. So the archive export is for real covering yourself. The ones on the archive export are for smaller term saving. All right, the last one, split. This is an interesting one to think about. What happens when you are sending an announcement to 2 or more zones, and one of those zones is busy with some higher priority message already, and another zone is available? What do you want to occur? By default, if split is not engaged, the system's going to wait until both of those zones are fully available, and then it will play them in both simultaneously. And that might be the behavior that you want. If you're doing that to a lot of zones, like every zone in your entire building, and this building is a system where you do have a lot of PA traffic, you might be waiting a really long time for every single possible zone to be available simultaneously. And if that's the case, this announcement that's sitting in your queue, it might eventually be a victim of the queue timeout, or it's gone on too long, whatever. So if you're sending to a lot of areas, splitting will basically treat this announcement as if it were being sent to each zone individually. So the zones where it is busy, it'll wait and be queued and play when that zone is ready. In the zones that are available, it plays it immediately, right now, because it's there. That is a good idea if you want to make sure that this announcement gets heard in every zone as quickly as possible. Well, if that's the case, why would you ever choose not to split, you ask? Good question. What if you have zones that overlap each other geographically in the space? Again, I'm going to go to that airport example. You got gate 13 and gate 14 right next to each other. You know there's people sitting in the middle of those that can hear gate 13 announcements and gate 14 announcements. If you split your announcements and it plays in gate 13 right now while gate 14 was just finishing an announcement, well then guess what? It's going to start playing in gate 14 like half a second later. And now the people sitting in between those zones are hearing the same announcement with like a half-second delay, and it's indecipherable because your brain goes, gets miswired, can't understand what it's hearing. So if you have zones that are overlapping in their footprints in your space, I would generally suggest that you don't want to split them amongst those zones. But if you've got zones that are completely segregated, they're their own room, they're on opposite sides of the building, then yeah, split it. That way you make sure it gets heard as quickly as possible. That is retry, archive, and split. Also on this page at the very top, the priority mode. So generally speaking, right now we start off in station user priority mode. That means that the page station from which every single page or message is sent gets its priority from the station itself. And I'll show you how you can assign a page station a priority level. That means that no matter who or what type of announcement is sent from that page station, it'll go out with a high or low priority based on the setting you've made. So maybe you've got a page station that is in the administrator's office, and even if he just wants to make an announcement that he thinks puppies are cute, which they are, it's still going to go out at a high priority level because it's his page station. Whereas you could change this to command priority. When we're in command priority, the commands themselves, the type of announcement that you're sending, they each get their own priority level, which you can establish, and we'll show you how as well. And that means that no matter who sends that, even if it's sent from the kiosk at the cafe, when they're sending out an emergency announcement, that emergency announcement still gets its high priority level that you've set. Regardless of which of these you pick, you can override that rule for specific exemptions. For instance, like I just said, if you've got an emergency announcement, whoever sends that from anywhere in the world should be able to always have that override any other priority global assignments that you've made. So even if it's in station user priority, you can choose to override that at the command level. Whereas if you are in command priority, you could choose to override that at a specific page station level. I know, like I said, it can get a little tricky. There's lots of little overlapping things all throughout the software where you can set this and then override this. It can get really granular, but that means that you have the flexibility to give it exactly what you want to give it. I'm going to keep mine in station user priority for now. You also here have queue timeouts. This allows you to decide how long should something exist in the queue before it gets booted. If it's in a queue for longer than a minute, you could say that's too long and now it's no longer important. Set that as high as an hour, or just leave it at no. If it's at no, then there's no timeout ever, and something could live in the queue indefinitely until it's time to finally play it. We also have cancel delay. After you hit go on an announcement, you could add 5, 10, or 15 seconds of reconsideration time where you second guess yourself as to whether or not you made the right choices. And then you could cancel the thing that you just sent before it actually gets delivered. And then finally, retry count. If something does get interrupted and re-enters the queuing system, how many times do you want that to happen? Once? Twice? 3 times? 4 times? If something got interrupted 4 times, was it really that important in the first place? Probably not. It's probably time to let that particular message go. Okay, whenever you make changes in the administrator, by the way, I'm going to delete my extraneous priorities I added down here. Whenever you make changes in the administrator, be sure to hit update in the big glowing orange box at the top, and then those changes will all go live. All right, we've made the critical initial changes in Administrator. We're gonna go back and take a look at the components. Let's take a quick break first.